Hello and welcome to the season 9 of the VML. We are very excited for a new season and we would like to thank our sponsors, Wizards of the Coast and Good Luck I5. Today I'm joined by Kuro and we have news. We have a special guest, TheNerdySteve. Welcome to our stream. We are very excited to have you. How are you feeling today? Excited to be here?
I am very, very ecstatic to be here and thank you for having me. This is going to be very, very great, and I'm excited to look at some standard magic before we go on to the new set next week.
Yeah, it's the last week that we have the Brothers War standard. Now everyone is talking about the new Phyrexia. And actually, we did something different this season. We are having one match live a week, which is really nice. Before, we were only doing that for the finals. But it's really exciting. And thank you for our competitors to being able to be in live here to provide some live magic. So we are really excited. We are really also excited about the decks that we have to see today. And I have to ask you, Kuro and then Steve, what deck would you bring if you were one of our players today? Kuro, what about you?
Well, personally, I'm always a sucker for blue light control, and that's what I brought. But I also got completely destroyed. So, in a meta that is tried and true, and that is very comfortable for a lot of people for as long as we've had it, I'd probably bring something pretty normative like Grixis or Esper, because those have obviously shown to be very good. But we also know that mono white was one of the choices in the finals last season, so that may be an option.
What about you, Steve?
Well, I really, really like the Esper Legends deck that goes on with Rafine. That's one of my favorite archetypes in the past. So, and that's what I brought this week. And so, yes, that's what I would have.
So I have good news for you both. Both the matches that you mentioned are going to be happening today. So we are going to see some mono white action and also some Esper. But let's not spoil. Can we take a look at the player slides for the first match that we are going to see? Let's look at the meta first. So let's see what our players decided to bring on week 1. Once again, I would like to thank Wizards of the Coast and Good Luck I5 for sponsoring the VML. We couldn't be here without you. So here we have the meta breakdown. Interesting look. Steve, what does it caught your eye at the first glance when you see these meta
Um,
breakdown here?
well, it's kind of exactly as I would expect it to look at. Grixis Midrange is something that is basically everywhere for the past couple of months. So, I'm not surprised to see it that much here.
What about you,
Yeah,
Kuro?
I absolutely agree. Like I said, Grixis and Mono White. I have a feeling some of this may be specifically because of the finals in last season. But like I was saying earlier, Grixis is tried and true. It's shown results in multiple different tournaments, and it just works really well. But there's also enough variance that you can play different varieties of it to try to edge against particular matchups, even the mirror.
Very good point there, Kuro. And I think it's funny because Azorius Soldier is a deck that is suddenly appearing. It was kind of a best of one deck, but now we have 13 players of our season that chose to bring this deck, which is really exciting. And Steve, I see the Esper there. Maybe not Legends, the Midrange, but I know there's also some Legend copy out there, which they vary a bit. And
Mm-hmm.
can we take a look into our player slide so to see what are we going to see in game 1 today? So first we have Miranda, and Miranda decided to bring mono blue. Steve, what do you think of this mono blue deck?
I really, really like the mono blue deck. It does a lot of cool things, and against the more grindy mid-range decks like Grixis, if you expect to see a lot of that, you can keep up your cheap counter magic to interact with their spells at a very, very nice tempo. And then eventually you can just put your haughty gins and protect them, and your opponent can't do anything about them. And so I just have a lot of fun playing with mono blue, even though my opponents might not.
Yeah, I think it's one of those decks that the opponent usually doesn't like, but it's really fun to play. We have our questions here that we always ask our players to see here feature on the slide. I particularly like the one that asks what is the most toxic card in the new set, because we know from next week we're going to see some toxic decks. Just a reminder, this week it's still Brothers War Standard, and from next week on, so from the week 2 of season 9 of VML, we'll start having the new Phyrexia set introduced. But for this week, we still decided to have the standard that people are used to, and so people have time to get the cards and build decks, test, etc. And can we take a look at the next player slide? So Miranda is playing against Brynn, and Brynn actually chose a very interesting deck, Mardu, Reanimator, Kuro. I have to ask you, what do you think of this Reanimator deck?
Oh my gosh. I completely forgot about this. Reanimator is an interesting archetype because its Achilles heel is counterspells. And so this is going to be really rough against Miranda's list. But something to note is that Miranda's list for counterspells are Skye, which is not very good against a list like this because your plan isn't really to play big creatures, and your small creatures aren't really worth countering. So I'm really excited to see how this works. I can imagine those duresses are going to be extremely important in the post board because otherwise there's really no way for Brynn to interact with those counters.
Yeah, very good point there. And actually, one of the things that you said, it's aligned with one of the answers that she gave here in our questionnaire. So Brynn said that can be really frustrating to play against mono blue, as also Steve said. So hopefully she is hoping to get some early damage with the dogs and get through with the counters. And as you said, Kuro, games 2 and 3, she moves into a more control style deck. So that's where the duresses probably will come in and really make a big difference.
I really like Liliana in the sideboard too. I just noticed that as well. It can be very difficult to deal with if your plan is to draw a lot of cards because you can just play out your hand and Liliana putters away. And the sacrifice gets around hexproof and ward.
Oh, that's true. I haven't thought about it, but that's a very great point. And are players ready? Because this is actually a live match that we have this week, and we have to have confirmation if. So we are working on it right now. Steve, what do you think of this deck?
So, first of all, it's always one of the biggest joys of me is when you say this is my worst matchup and then you go against your worst matchup because that always happens to me, and so I'm glad that that other people can feel and sympathize with me on that. But I really Brynn makes a point of against mono blue you can use the mutts and the gold hound early, and one of the ways to combat mono blue is to get a bunch of creatures early on. And in a lot of reanimation type decks, you aren't necessarily putting pressure up on the board. You're finding other non-creature ways to put your big creatures from your hand into your graveyard. And so the mutt and the gold hound here might actually be much more surprisingly effective than I would have thought. So that's exciting.
Oh, great point. I'm excited to see if that comes in play here as our players are actually ready to start now on game 1. And we see our opening end for Miranda with Slip Out the Back, Negate, and Tolarian Terror. Kuro, do you think this is a keepable end?
It's keepable, but it's also really slow. As you can see, there's a mulligan there. And I would say it's a good mulligan because there's no card draw. So there's no way to cycle through cards to make that terror come down really early. If you're letting your opponent just run over you, that's really dangerous for a sort of more, let's say, streamlined deck like Reanimator. This hand is a lot better. You have a lot more early stuff. You even have the negate, have a good threat on turn 3. It's not to love.
Jean is definitely a key card. And here we see Mut as Brynn's strategies to attack with the dog and win with the dog. So dog is already in play. And Miranda is playing a Consider, deciding to put a land on the graveyard, which makes sense, and drawing. So now Miranda's have access to Negate, which I would be really happy to have against Reanimator. As I also see that Brynn does have Portal of Phyrexia. And Steve, what do you think of this card, Portal of Phyrexia?
It is a very interesting card. Now, in this matchup specifically, though, if Portal gets reanimated via Invoke, it is almost game over because it's going to kill the entire board of the mono blue deck, and that reoccurring reanimation effect is going to lock the game down. If the portal was instead maybe a sanctuary warden that can get bounced, and maybe the mono blue deck could go over it and interact with it, but portal is that would make me very scared.
I definitely am scared of that card. And if you are watching this stream right now, I want you to comment, who do you think is going to win this match, or who do you think is favorable? Mono Blue or Mardu Reanimator? Both decks, not your most played deck of the week. So interesting choices here by our players. And now Miranda has some options. So she can play the Jean, and then the negate passes to cost only 1 because Jean reduces the cost. There's also a consider. So I think Miranda opting to play the Jean here, which is definitely a key card of the deck. And we see that Brynn maybe trying to remove it here. We then destroy evil. That gets
these turns are going to be super pivotal because now Miranda has no way to counter whatever's coming down next, and this Fable is going to be a lot of value. Discard 2 Reanimator targets and basically threaten a really good top deck going forward.
What do you think Miranda needs here to turn this game around?
Invoke Justice and lands.
What is that card by invitation only? What exactly does that do? Is that the one where you choose a number between 1 and 13 and you keep that many, or you sacrifice that many?
You sacrifice that many, equal to the number that was chosen. So it's usually played in a deck where you want to go wide, because then you can force your opponent to sack their board, and you can sack everything but your best guy. The best analogy is the Wandering Emperor from the new set, because that sort of says sacrifice everything except for 1, which I know is a little different, but the idea is the same. You keep your best guy, force your opponent to sack everything. In a deck like Mono Blue, there are 8 main deck creatures. Sorry. There are 8 main deck creatures. So by invitation only is by definition always going to hit every single one of them.
Yeah.
No matter what. So that has to get countered.
Yeah, and that's what I was just bringing up, because I was like, that has a very, very similar effect of Portal to Phyrexia, right? Here it against a lot of aggressive decks, these board wipes aren't necessarily, I mean, they're good, but the aggressive decks have a lot more creatures. But against the mono blue deck where you only have 8 creatures, these board wipes that that don't target are just going to be really, really effective against you.
Exactly, I completely agree, and that's where this card is better than the Populate. That it's a more popular usage, but here we see the choice paying off. But unfortunately, Brynn doesn't seem to find lands, which is really sad. But at the same time, we do have the okay. There's a land there. Fine with the Fable, that's really good, and we see a removal with the Fateful Absence, which also a card that I really enjoy as a removal for white. White getting a lot of good cards, right, lately.
Yeah.
In Phyrexia as well. Why do you think there's this shift where now white is suddenly good when it was kind of a neglected archetype before?
I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily say that white has been neglected per se, considering the absence of green from standard. But I will say that the sort of shift to good white cards, we have Wandering Emperor, we have Lay Down Arms, we have the Sanctuary Warden, we have Invoke Justice, and now in New Phyrexia, we have all these crazy removals. Ossification, we have that Better Arrest. We're seeing a really interesting uptick in good white, specifically threats and removal spells. And I think a lot of it is sort of combating the Grixis dominance. It's very interesting to see, and I'm wondering how much it'll change going forward.
Yeah, I really like that in just a couple weeks we went for a Grixis dominated meta, for now a much more, as we saw our meta breakdown, diverse meta game where we had a lot of one-off decks, we had a lot of mono white and Esper.
Look at what just happened here. Fading Hope cast in response, Fateful Absence. Because Brynn is looking at that list and saying, if you've played a Fading Hope, that's one less spell you can use to save your Jin from death.
Mm-hmm.
And so Miranda casting that at the end of the turn, if they had left it there, left the token, could have saved the Jin, because that spell pierce isn't going to work. Wow.
That's true. That was a very good play there. And now Miranda able to kind of restore the board with a Jean and a Tolarian that gets a terror that gets super cheap. That's one of the wonders of this card is eventually just play it for 1 mana. And there's the Destroy Evil. We do know there's a spell pierce, but Brynn does have the mana to pay for it. And that's where open deck lists get a different kind of feel than closed ones, because you know your opponent might have the spell pierce, you might play around it.
If you know that Miranda is only playing 2 mainboard negates and every other spell is mana permission, first of all, they're not going to sacrifice to make disappear. Then they're just losing their guy. It's the same situation. And then spell pierce is just really rough here. So the only thing that Miranda needs is the negate, but there's only one more in the deck because Miranda already used one of them.
Mm-hmm. And for me, if I'm Miranda, I'm going, oh, of course my opponent has the second, I think, Destroy Evil, and not just drawing all the big creatures in hand that I, can Essence Scatter. So I am getting a little sad and hoping that, my counter magic will finally be useful here, because I want my opponent to make this Essence Scatter work. And we see 2 really, really big creatures that, Brynn isn't going to reanimate right now. Most likely will try and hard cast, but maybe Brynn is going, I don't want to, my opponent has 5 cards in hand, maybe I don't want to make that Essence Scatter useful. So there's a lot of stuff going on here.
For sure. I completely agree there.
It's a thing that I like to call virtual card advantage. When I play my control decks, I try to blink removal spells by not playing creatures. And Brynn is doing exactly that. By not playing things that are answered by Miranda's cards, then Brynn basically is able to say, well, I don't have to do anything. Your cards don't do anything either. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to build a Jin up. There's no reason to make Tolarian Terror cheaper. I mean, it is cheap already, but...
Mm-hmm.
And now we see that there's enough mana on the blue player side to counter anything, but we know that there's only a spell pierce and essence catcher. And I think at this point, maybe Brynn cannot afford to play around the spell pierce, not having enough mana. But what I see is keep attacking with the 1/1, and suddenly we have Miranda at 7 life.
Yeah, it's, those gold hounds and, those mutts, the damage really adds up. The mono blue deck, unlike a lot of decks in standard, you're not taking damage from your pain lands, right? And so this is all damage that Brynn's little tiny creatures, not the reanimated big beefy creatures, the little 1/1s and 2/2s have dealt 13 damage, which is mind-boggling.
I like that, mind-boggling. I really like that. And now we see that the mono blue player has access to Fading Hope, and isn't it so tempting to bounce that? But think about it: if you bounce the Fable, then Brynn can try to replay it, and there is not really an answer for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's sort of one of the key core weaknesses of mono blue as an archetype, as a color. And I've had trouble with this before playing a mono blue control deck, is how do you deal with a massive amount of 1 and 2 mana spells? Fading Hope works best on tokens and cards that cost 3 mana, because you get mana advantage from them having to replay it, or you just kill the token entirely. But if you're bouncing 1 mana creatures, it's not that great, because they have parity. They'll play another land, they'll just play another thing. It's really rough here. And that Mutt has an Enters the Battlefield ability too. Bouncing that is not even necessarily the best decision.
Yeah. We saw that Impulse had some choices there. And Miranda ended up going with Fading Hope instead of making Disappear. Steve, do you have any feeling why is that?
I think right now Miranda is looking at the board going, how do I win this? And I think it is by, it seems like your opponent's playing around your counter spells and doesn't need to play into your counter spells. So you need to try and leverage the creatures you have right now on the battlefield to try and kill your opponent. If the terror gets in 2 more times now after this attack, you win the game. So maybe it's, just trying to be like, I can't give my opponent any more time. Let's see what I can do.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you said, now attacking with terror 2 more times and it's done. And we also see in the top of the deck a Jean that is now a 10 attack. So that's not a joke. That Jean gets really big and really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I bet Miranda's eyeing that Jin and thinking, all I have to do is attack 1 time to get that in there. Everything else, non-plus. Just attack 1 time, just once, and we can get there. But the question is can Miranda get to that point? Brynn is getting to the point where they can potentially cast by invitation only and hold up 2 extra mana, which is extremely good value here. And that Fable is going to just make the tokens go wide, which just gets around the creature anyway. Miranda has a Fading Hope, which is super mid, but virtually no way to permanently address this board of tokens and small creatures.
And you brought up the Scrapwork must enter the battlefield triggered ability before, and that's very relevant here because we also see Brynn discarding a big creature that they don't want to cast, right? And so I'm discarding these big creatures I don't want to cast to turn on my opponent's Essence Scatter. Let's see if I can draw a little creature that I can attack with, that has Menace or something else that's going to put a lot more pressure.
And here we see that Miranda is considering if that Fading Hope is going to be used or not. And I really agree with Kuro said that now Miranda's mind must be, I have my strategy, I have my Jean, I just need this Jean to attack once.
Yeah.
And I lost so many times to Mono Blue because of that Jean attacking in 1 turn or 2 and just killing me when I was completely winning the game.
I don't know if I would have cast Impulse at the end of the turn there. And the reason why is because you're going to draw the Jin. Impulse is usually at its best when you don't know what you're about to draw and you need something specific. But Miranda knew the Jin was on the top. That was going to be in the hand no matter what. Jin makes everything cost less, and the deck is so cheap. I don't see a reason to save that 2 mana. That's interesting. I wonder if this will affect the game in any way. Because they did draw another Impulse.
And right now, if you are Miranda, I also think you're kind of going, okay, what after this Jin resolves can my opponent do can stop me from attacking for lethal next year, next turn? And not next year, next turn. And that is probably I think maybe the Warden is the only relevant card, and Destroy Evil. There might be something else in the list that I'm not seeing. So you have to go, can I counter the Warden? Can I protect my Jin from Destroy Evil? And that's a no. So, but if you impulse into counter magic, maybe you can.
That's a good point. And here I'm seeing that Brynn kind of is in a place that is starting to get really difficult to play against the blue deck, because you have to find an answer for that Jean. You know that your opponent has 3 cards and most likely a counter spell. So how do you get out of here? Because it's not easy.
So let's see what the Mutt discards and draws. A Fable, which I don't think is going to help Brynn right now.
Brynn decided not to cast by invitation only. This could be a serious decision path that will result in a loss. If Brynn had popped off the by invitation only, just try it out, could have made both creatures die because there's no Fading Hope there. Impulse could get something, but there's There's no guarantee. I've seen impulses get 4 lands even. You never know. What a risky play.
Yeah, excited to see the outcome. So we get the impulse there.
Still happens. Oh, there's the treasure. Oh, I forgot about that. There
Mhm.
is 2 mana to pay for spell points.
There is from the treasures.
The funny thing is, if the 2 gold hounds are used as mana to pay for the spell pierce, if then Brynn chooses 2 as the number, Brynn also loses their board as well. So it'll be a complete board wipe, and we'll start over again. But we'll see where that goes.
Yeah,
There's
but
a
when
big-
you're dying in the next turn, I think you don't really have many options.
Yeah, you don't. It's also interesting to note that with that impulse, we saw 2 Tolarian Terror from Miranda go at the bottom of the library. And I don't know how many of these creatures have died yet, but there's not a lot of gas in this top part of the library for the mono blue player.
Oh, a fading hope in their own gene. I love that.
It's worth mentioning that by invitation only, you pick the number when it resolves. You don't get to hear the number and then bounce your creature and say, well, I'm just not going to sacrifice it. So if Miranda bounces the Djinn, then all Brynn has to do is say, okay, sacrifice 1 creature. And then Terror is gone. By invitation only resolves. That Kiki-Jiki,
And you have Fable.
yeah, Fable's still out, which could make or break the situation, which is exactly what happened.
Oh, and it was also pre-combat, so you still get to attack as
Woo!
well.
But that negate
close.
though. So now Brynn is at tough spot because once again, Jean threatening to kill next turn. And we see an answer for creature with essence creature and an answer for a non-creature spell with that negate. And I think this is going to be it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what a game we had. Actually much more interactive than I thought about this.
It was a very good back and forth game with a lot of different decisions, and it was really, really interesting. I have a question though: if Unearth, is that an activated ability from the graveyard, or are you casting it?
It is an activated ability from the graveyard. And fun fact, it stays in the graveyard until the ability resolves. So you can exile it with Hearse before the Unearth resolves, and you cannot activate it again because Unearth is also a sorcery speed ability. So those counter spells are not going to help. There are no what's it called? Defabricates in the sideboard.
And we take a look here now at the sideboard. And Kuro, what do you think of this mono blue sideboard?
Definitely adding in that negate, I think, is the best choice. Those slip out the back seem extremely good against the spot removal of destroy evils. It also, that is a sort of a counter to board wipes because you phase it out, it doesn't die to sacrifice. I don't know if Delver's Secrets is necessary because this isn't really control per se. It's very combo-y matchup, but maybe Miranda doesn't realize that Brynn has a transformational sideboard that can turn into a control deck. Stowaway is also a nice card against slower decks, such as Midrange or something like that. I think primarily I would focus on the negate and the slips as was what happened here.
Yeah, so let's take a look to see what Miranda decides to do. And Steve, I have a question for you because you are our guest of the week. So I have to ask you.
Okay.
Phyrexia is out. What do you think is the most toxic card of the set?
The most toxic card of the set? Well, I'm a huge fan of Jace and getting mill. I milled someone in the early access for I think 22, then I returned it to my hand, and then another 15. I returned it with the graveyard proliferate thing, and that was very, very toxic of me. So I want to thank Jace for helping me with that.
I've been on the other side. I've been milled by Jace, so I would agree with that toxic Jace. we go back here on our match, and we are again seeing Miranda's side, and there is an interesting end. We do see the creatures, we do see some interaction with the essence catchers, and consider Kuro, what do you think of this end?
If I'm Miranda, I would be tempted to keep this because it has the draw, it has a counter. You can counter a mutt, which is so-so, but you're preventing some draw, even though you're not going first. And you can try to build your Jin. But what Miranda does not realize is that Brynn's opening hand has 0 early creatures. And those essence scatters are not going to help, which means Miranda basically kept a 5-card hand against this 7-card hand. We'll have to see how this goes.
Yeah. And Brynn's hand also with the Hearse and the Liliana. The Hearse is incredible in this matchup because it gets rid of the instants and sorceries in the graveyard. So the Haughty Jin will have 0 power, and the Tolarian Terror will cost a lot of mana, which protects your Liliana. So if Liliana resolves and you have the Hearse, you can just uptick Liliana, downtick when they play a creature, and it is very, very, very powerful position to be in.
Yeah, I have found that her hard counters mono blue almost by itself.
Yeah.
It's scary and amazing how good. And there's a duress. Okay. That's I can't help but laugh because that's just such an amazing draw right now.
Yeah, and one of the things you said, Kuro, when we were seeing the player's side was exactly that the restful sideboard is going to do some work. And when your opponent has a lot of interactive magic, like mono blue, you never know what's on the other side. Just the ability to see what's there is really relevant. And this Liliana being able to minus, just destroy your Jin, still be alive.
And also for Brynn, it is always wonderful when you duress and you see those 2 essence scatters, because then you're like, okay, you know what? I'm never going to cast my big creature. I'll just reanimate like I planned. And you are so happy with that.
Speaking of reanimation spells, look at that draw.
Yeah. And that can come into play next turn. And Brynn also saw that there's only Essence Scatters and a Tolarian Terror. There are 2 unknown cards in Miranda's hand, so Brynn has to make an educated guess and decision on to go for it. But even with this Liliana here, you aren't pressured into going for it, so you can just wait if you want.
One of the things that I really like in the Reanimator deck is usually combo decks. They kind of are a hit or miss. Either you get your combo and win or you don't. But this Mardu deck has this aspect of it that even if you are not able to combo, you have a lot of mid-rangey cards with Fable, with the dogs that are able to still interact and being able to win some games even without reanimating per se. And there it is, Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
And I also want to point out something that Brynn did the previous turn, which I really like. With Hearse against the mono blue deck, usually you learn to wait to activate your cards until the last minute possible, usually your opponent's end step. But Brynn exiled instants and sorceries before it was Miranda's turn, so that makes the Tolarian Terror 7 mana. I've accidentally let my mono blue opponent go with an untapped Hearse, and they could cast the Tolarian Terror, and I was like, oh no, I should have exiled those cards earlier. So that was something that's very, very good to do, and it goes against what you normally want to do with cards like that.
Very
I like
good
this thirst here. Oh, sorry, Filipa.
No. Yeah.
This Hearse, this thirst. This thirst is very nice here. It is going to be able to discard those essence scatters and try to build up the yard. It's not going to be possible to build up faster than that Hearse can exile, but you can sort of get those dead cards out of your hand at least and try to build up the secondary plan. You just got to try to build up the 7 mana and hard cast those terrors. It's not the best at all, but you kind of have no other choice. Miranda, I don't think they sided in Pithing Needle, which is the way that mono blue deals with Hearse. There's no Pithing Needle in the 60 right now. It's in the sideboard, which is huge.
Yeah. And also, if as a mono blue player and looking at how my opponent's deck is just making me literally not able to do anything, it might make me reconsider, if we go into a game 3, my sideboard plan, and maybe I will want the Delver's a secret so I can, do something early on, because having a 1/1, even if it doesn't flip, is better than having these 5/5s that you can't cast. Not saying you would take out the Tolarian Terrors necessarily, but to have something might be a little helpful.
Yeah, especially considering that if Miranda loses here, she will be on the play, so that's really relevant as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that idea of transformational sideboarding, especially since Brynn is demonstrating a very, very low critical mass of removal. Those 1/1s are going to come down. They're not going to get answered. So if you can basically play the pseudo, not Rot Priest, not green, toxic deck that has the 4 copies of, Slip Out the Backs and 4 Spell Pierces or whatever, that works for you. That works for you. It gets there. There's a terror.
Yeah. And also we kind of brought up before, but with like Fable and Mutt in Brynn's deck, you can really discard the cards that aren't useful and draw into better cards. And it makes the mono blue deck, if you're playing mono blue, you can give your plan out, like you can present creatures or present counter magic, but then your opponent has the option to, I can discard these cards. I can discard my removal because you don't have anything. So it just makes it very, very difficult to go against these types of mid-range decks, because what you have might not be relevant to what your opponent's going to loot to.
That's definitely an issue that I've encountered in the past.
Is it mean of me that I want this spell to resolve?
Well, I think you will get your wish.
Ask and you shall receive.
So this is Soul Mangler?
Dusk Mangler. When
Dusk
it enters
Mangler?
the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, sacrifices a creature, and loses 4 life. Usually to cast it, you must do one of those things yourself. But it still triggers if it's reanimated, and you don't have to do a dang thing. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's this weird uncommon from Streets of New Capene Pasta.
And like we can also just see this Liliana literally taking over the game. Liliana is going, you are not having a hand, you are not having a creature, you are not doing anything. And if I'm Miranda, I am really considering that Pithing Needle now, because it is making me sad.
And who's playing control now, right?
Right.
Another thing, this 5/4 is not legendary, right?
No, it is
so
not.
You could copy it with Kiki Jiki, which is really, really terrifying, honestly.
Yeah, and I don't see a single out in the mono blue deck, and definitely a 5 mana terror is not it. Now things might change, as you both were talking about this transformation sideboard shenanigans. Steve, would you consider here the Delvers now on the play?
I think this is also one of the interesting things about the mono blue deck. While it has a really, good shell, how you play the deck can vary from person to person. And I think going, I need to be the aggro person, be more proactive, because the first game where I was doing my own thing, I just barely won. And the second game where I went with that plan again, I didn't. Maybe I need to go more aggressive, and hopefully that will be enough.
And here we see exactly that. We see a mulligan that tries to be a bit more aggressive, because the mono blue does need a good hand. And Kuro, what do you think of this?
I just want to point out really quickly that I don't think Pithing Needle got sideboarded into Miranda's deck. And that may prove to be problematic depending on how this game goes. This hand looks fantastic. You bottom terror here because you can't trust your opponent to not have the hearse. It's a good hand. Stowaway is going to get in there. It attacks Liliana. It could get sacrificed, but you do have protection. But that Pithing Needle is still in the sideboard, I think. I keep thinking about that. A bold choice. Very
And
bold.
very bold. But this stowaway, though, if it does resolve and, gets a couple of tacks, it can really, really, really change the game into Miranda's favor. It seems like Brynn might be deciding a tough mulligan here. So that's also going to help the mono blue deck. When you go against mono blue, mulliganing feels absolutely terrible because you need your lands and you need your spells to, compete with them. And so this is also just already, not particularly wonderful.
One thing about sideboards is that, and I've always heard this playing Magic, is that sometimes it's a mistake to over sideboard, right? Because to putting a card like Fitting Middle is a very good card, but at the same time, you think you have to take something that is relevant to your deck, that makes it work, that is a core, like, so this sideboarding is kind of like a difficult choice of keeping your deck integrity and original plan, but at the same time preventing what your opponent is doing, and
Mhm.
how much of that you want to do. And on the play, I see a point for not playing these more reactive cards, let's say, and just going more aggressive.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Maybe on the draw it would have been a much better thing to sign in, but right now it may prove. But there's an Obnixilis brought in. That's so exciting. I love
Mhm.
Obnixilis. That's so cool.
I definitely love Omnislice as well. A planeswalker that hasn't seen that much playing standard. It does see occasionally,
Mhm.
but I really like the card, and I think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when it first came out, people were comparing him to Oko, and that comparison has not aged very well. But he's still a very, very. I love him. I love Rakdos, and I love sacking stuff to Obnixilis and getting a casualty of 8 every now and then. So I can do that.
I got mine in a pre-release. I sold it. Got 20 euros. Got some dinner out.
Exactly.
So I'm a
I
fan.
think the thing about Obnixilis shines the most. Oh, Brynn did not play a black mana. Must be playing Fable this turn then.
Yeah.
But Obnixilis shines the most generally against these controlly not playing permanence decks. Because if you're playing creatures, it's pretty easy to attack and kill Obnixilis.
Hmm.
Like, frankly, even if Ob minuses twice and makes 2 devil tokens, usually the creature quality in this format is good enough you're not really concerned. But in control, when you're not playing creatures that can pressure it, it's a lot more problematic and a lot more threatening because that's at plussing every turn. You have basically no way to deal with it. It's one of the reasons why I play Blast Zone, actually.
Hmm.
But obviously, this isn't my like control deck, my favorite type. Oh,
You play Blast. Do you like the new land? The one that makes the 1/1 toxic?
oh Mirix?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I actually have one. I'm
Yeah,
putting it
I
in my
think
standard
that
deck
would
right
be
now.
cool in your deck, right?
Oh, it's fabulous.
And so now it looks like Miranda is trying to attacking with the suspicious stowaway, and you get to loot. And this is a very interesting discard decision, and I'm not sure what is correct. This is one of the few times that make disappear is better than it normally would appear in this deck because you have a lot more creatures to sacrifice, and that your 1/1 Delver now can go away because it's not a 5/5 Tolarian Terror or a Jin that's going to get huge, right? So make disappear is better in this post board than it is in the main deck pre-board, which is a very interesting result of the change in the sideboard plan.
Yeah, I really like Make Disappear here for the reasons that you stated, because the casualty counters the casualty.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there to love?
Right?
And there's a negate backup too, which is extremely threatening against Brynn. Negate is fabulous. There's the Hearse.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw how good Earth was last game.
Mm-hmm. And this is going to be a very, very important turn for Brynn, and there are so many different ways to navigate this, and we're gonna have to see how Miranda then reacts to this.
Ooh, Goldhound. The doggo is back for revenge.
Mm-hmm.
That- That's an interesting attack. The treasure token is really relevant here on giving the ability to Brynn to start using the spells to threaten. And at one point, we see that Miranda only has 2 cards, right? So yes, it might be 2 counters, but it might be 2 lands. We don't know. We need to start pushing those spells and kind of testing what's on the other side. And we see exactly that. Bryn just like playing the small spells, making small threats, testing if there's some counters, testing the others.
Mm-hmm. And
I
this is
feel like
no, go on.
I feel like if you're Brynn here, sorry, you go after me. If you're Brynn here, I think you know that Miranda either has lands or counters because number one, Miranda discarded Impulse, which means that Miranda has a hand that does not need any particular digging. If you needed digging, you would discard that and play Impulse. Secondly, you can kind of use the arena timer to your advantage because attacks are resolving without a stop. You know that your opponent doesn't have Fading Hopes or Slip Out the Backs, but they might have counter magic, which just happened here because this timer will stop when the spell goes on the stack. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to point is Bryn decided to cast the Hearse before the Obnixilis, and depending on what you expect your opponent to have, that might, if you think your opponent has counter magic, maybe you would want to cast the more important spell second to see if your first one would resolve. Or, there's just a lot of ways of what you think your opponent has. And unfortunately, the Hearse did get countered, and so that didn't work out as well. But maybe Omnixilis is more important to Bryn in this matchup, in this position, than the Hearse.
Yeah, and we see that exactly, Steve. The Obnixilis is played now with casualty, so you have double Obnixilis. And this card is definitely it might not seem like much in the beginning, but those abilities stack up.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that there's no particular answer for the gene.
Mm-hmm.
And
And the Delver flipping is very important for this clock and how much damage Bryn will be taking.
a 3/2 flyer, it's better than a 1/1.
Only slightly.
I would say so. Yes, I would generally agree. Generally.
Expert, yeah.
Yeah, that's my expert critique. That's my expert evaluation. That a 3/2 is better than a 1/1 in most cases, unless there's maybe a weak stone. What is it?
Oh.
Oh, I know. Oh, meek
Yeah.
stone is what I'm referring to. Meek stone, not weak stone.
Mm-hmm. And this is also an attack from Miranda that could have gone different ways. There's potential where you don't even acknowledge the existence of the Obnixilis and you just attack your opponent. And that's going to go depending on if you think, oh, I have my opponent on a 2-turn clock, even with the Obnixilis on the battlefield, I'm just going to go there. But that is a slight gamble if things don't go as planned.
Yeah, I would be tempted as well to just hit at the face, discard a counterspell, hit the face, threaten to win in 2 turns. That could have been something, but that is a big risk for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the dog. I really like Mutt. And Mutt kind of look like it's flying, but it's not. To me, it looks like a bat, not like a dog.
Yeah, it's correct. I mean, yeah. That's my
Okay,
quality commentary.
I just see like I would be so happy to be in Miranda's shoes here, just being able to deal casually this much damage. So we have 9 damage and filtering the end and still being able to have counter magic, so your opponent cannot do anything. And next turn, these flyers are littles.
Mm-hmm. It was a 2-turn clock right now, and Brynn has to draw. Well, I mean, theoretically, the best draw would be by invitation only, but that gets countered extremely easily.
Mm-hmm.
Don't see a way out here.
Oh, and it's the night now. So that 1/1 is now 2/1.
Mm-hmm.
And
And it
2-1
draws
is,
you a card.
yes, a 2-1 is better than a 1-1.
That is true.
Almost
We
twice
have
as
we have a voice from above. Our producer, amazing shout out to Phoebe, sometimes speaks to our ear, and Phoebe was saying that the 2/1 is double the good as a 1/1.
Mm-hmm.
Almost.
Almost, almost.
And this is the point when you go against mono blue where you go, okay, I have one spell in my hand. I will pray to whatever I can and beg to whoever I can that this resolves. And sadly, you have to beg to your opponent, and your opponent won't let it resolve.
Yeah, it's one of those things like you really have as you say, like I don't know if they see Game of Thrones or not, but they do have to pray to the Seven Eye Lords, like all
Yeah,
of them. And
exactly. And sometimes your opponent doesn't have it, right? And that happens every so often and so rarely. And you just have to hope. And it didn't happen
I
here.
feel like it never happens to me though. Like they always have it. Even when I think they don't, they do. And we are back, or you can see our faces now. What a game we had. Like this was a long one and a very interesting. Like definitely, first of all, thank you so much to both Brynn and Miranda to coming here live. It's not easy. It's a lot of pressure, a lot
Hmm.
of logistics involved. Like they could have just like comfortably played their match during the week, but they chose to come here live for us to have some live magic. So big props there, and I'm really excited for the matches we have had. Once again, thanking here our sponsors, Wizard of the Coast, and good luck i5 for sponsoring the VML, which is really nice and help us move forward. Steve, what did you think of this match?
It was a very, very incredibly back and forth match. There was a lot more interaction than I thought it would be. You know, the mono blue deck is always going to have some type form of interaction, but this Reanimator deck, it was aggressive too, so the mono blue deck couldn't just stand back. There was also, the hearses, and it had a lot of very relevant, you know, interactive spells. And so it was just really, really cool seeing when you could go for it and when you didn't, and it was just well played by both players.
Kuro, I saw that the Earth was like kind of the unexpected great card. What do you think was the star of the match here?
Oh man, I mean, Liliana was a big deal, and hers was too. I think if Brynn had gotten an opening hand in Game 3 that had those cards, it would have swung a completely different direction. Because the impact that those had on Mono Blue's strategy was felt to a really high magnitude. So for the MVP for Brynn's deck there in that matchup specifically would have been hers, for me anyway. For Miranda, though, the MVP I think was probably just straight up Negate, not gonna lie. Negate is such a reliable and, in my opinion, the most balanced counterspell ever printed. But when it's good, it's good. And it works exactly the way you want it to, no matter what part of the game you're in. All you have to do is be able to pay for it, and you get the effects. You really can't be upset about that.
That's true. We love a counter that doesn't have a condition. Like, yeah, it has a condition that it has to be a non-creature, but not having to pay a certain amount of mana, just countering it. It's pretty good. And I think we're going to have a look now at our player slides because we have more magic today. This was just the first out of 4 matches that we are seeing today. And here we
No
are
way.
seeing yeah, and here we are seeing Skye playing Azoria's Shoulders. Like this deck has been everywhere and definitely been very popular these past months. Steve, what do you think of this deck?
Well, so today in the new standard with one, I was playing an updated soldiers list, and you basically only get Sea Chrome Coast as the new card. But this is a deck I love a lot. It's very, very efficient, and it can also do a lot of really powerful things with Sky Strike Officer. Is one of my secretly favorite cards of the past year. Just being able to, draw so many cards out of nowhere just makes me happy, and I get to attack with a flyer that creates stuff. It does everything I want. So I love this deck, and I'm looking forward to see it played.
Yeah, like I played against this deck recently, and they had the card that whenever you attack with 5 or more creatures, they gain +1/+1 on
Mhm.
flying, and I was like, that.
Harbin, and the cool thing about Harbin is he doesn't need to be one of the attackers, so you can top deck and then cast it, and then attack with 5 soldiers that were there, and it's just a surprise win a lot of times. And it wouldn't surprise me if that comes into play in this upcoming match.
And what is Skye playing against, or who is Skye playing against in this case? Gabi. Gabi is playing EZ Prowess, and Kuro, I have to have your opinion on this one.
Well, it's blue, which is obviously great because I love blue, and blue is my favorite color. One really interesting comparison you can do with Is It Prowess with the mono blue deck that we saw earlier is that it plays a bit of a different plan, right? Because one, you get access to spot removal like Strangle and Abrade and Brotherhood's End even, which are all fantastic removal spells. Strangle being one that I don't see as often, but still very good. 3 damage, 5, 3 damage, 1 mana. I almost said 1 damage, 3 mana. That would be kind of trash. But you also get access to Fable, and Fable is extremely good when you can combine it with even just one single copy of Jin. You get that Jin in there, and you're just doing fantastic. Interesting other things of note, Gabi is playing Leer. Leer, a card that I don't normally see either. It's very exciting. 1 H-Break in the sideboard, H-Break Hullbreaker Horror. One of my favorite control win cons in recent years. I'm excited to see how this is going to stack up. I don't think we'll see any H-Breaks today, but those Brotherhoods are going to be really important.
Yeah, and let's get that match started. If you can see here, Steve, what do you think of the card Leer? It's a card that we haven't seen that much, although it's one of the best cards in Standard, in my opinion. At least one of the best creatures.
Well, I remember when, like, this time last year, everyone was, like, potentially calling for a ban of Leer because of how ubiquitously powerful it was. And then, like, after rotation, I forgot the card was in Standard, right? I have never seen the card drop that much so quickly before. So I'm very, very excited to see if, Leer can get some of the former glory back.
Yeah, losing Divide by Zero was probably the biggest blow, because Leer making things uncounterable makes it a complete non-bow with actual counterspells. And this deck, it does play some. It does play some counterspells. So you want to Leer those counterspells back, you got to work for it. Do the silly thing where you Fading Hope in response.
And one of the things, if I am Sonic playing the Soldier deck right now, I am very, very scared of Gabi's Brotherhood's End. Having those main deck, I believe there were a couple main deck board wipes, is something that makes me feel very, very sad about if you're playing this deck, because that's just usually a sideboard card, or more likely a sideboard card, and it's a very cheap and efficient board wipe. And we also see that the Soldier deck did not draw a 3rd land here, which is also very unfortunate.
It is very unfortunate, but I do see at least a way to create some soldiers in instant speed, and they are pumped by the veteran. But as you said, not drawing the 3rd land there, especially when we see that Gabi does have such a great end.
Hey, Steve, what did you say about Brotherhood's End?
I know, exactly. And this is the thing where, if I am Gabi, right, Brotherhood End also doesn't kill your own Haughty Jin. And so it's just when your board wipes kill your opponent's board and not yours, you really can't ask for a better card in your deck. And so Brotherhood End is going to be a really, really important card that Gabi wants to find and loot for, and that Sonic is going to have to really, really be aware of and play around. And it's hard to play around a 3-mana spell that board wipes you.
Yeah, Haughty Jin is in fact too hot to be killed by Brotherhood's End.
Exactly.
I really love the fact that this card reduces the mana of the spell, so usually you are able to do crazy things like this right now.
Mhm. And this is also an interesting play here because you can, if you have a board wipe, you can sometimes wait to cast it. Like your opponent's 2/2/2s aren't necessarily the biggest threats here, but playing Brotherhood's End before your Fable flips allows you now to have your Fable and Haughty Djinn. And that is, something where Gabi is going, I want to be more aggressive here and make sure my opponent doesn't draw the third and fourth land to potentially get back in this game.
Oh, and we see a strangle there. And we know there's another gene in end, and this gene is going to attack for 7. So next turn we have a potential kill there, which is terrifying.
Oh yeah, no, it is scaring me.
Yes, when you're playing a Jinn, you're always thinking about what its power is, because depending on what its power is, that's how many turns it takes to kill, right? And 7 is the critical value for 3-turn kill. Reflection, obviously, cloning it makes it 2 turns. So there's that. But like you're always thinking about the different thresholds. 4 power, 5 turns. 5 power, 4 turns. 7 power, 3 turns. 8, and then 2 turns would be 10 power. So sort of that sweet spot is between 5 to 7-ish.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I see here is that Tali gets in, right? The Tali that's on sideboard gets in. And Tali is such a great card against these Izzet deck, making your opponent's spell cost more. But it's fun because actually I had this exact same matchup, and Jean makes things cheaper, but then Talia makes them, so it evens out, you know?
Yeah.
All
And
balanced in the
there,
end.
and there was also a card that I didn't even consider too. One of the ways that Sonic can get back or stay in this game is Kyla's Reconstruction. I think that's the name of the card, where you can look at. Yeah, and that is one of the ways that you can get back away from a very bad board wipe, and that might be something that Gabi would want to consider too, because after Brotherhood's End, you're usually in a very good spot, but the reconstruction might be something to be aware of.
Yeah, Gabi would be able to consider that too. Gabi does play 3 of that card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gabi only getting 1 land here, having immediately to Mole. This end is better. We have Fading, we have Jean, but still no access to red.
Mm-hmm. And that is one of the downsides of the Brotherhood End in this deck, right? Is the double red is a real cost. We like to think that just in 2-color decks you always have, but it is something that to be aware of.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy.
Fading Up does help though with the ability to scry, just delaying Sonic being able to try to find the red mana. We don't. And now, like, Sonic, Gabi really needs a red source. Although I think Gabi made a good decision on the mule, because you have to go for it, right? You have access to Fading Up that scries you. You already moved to 6. You definitely don't want to move to 5 with this deck because you need answers. And you have 2 lands, so.
Oh, this is not looking good for Gabi.
Yeah.
And that Siege Veteran is going to get those creatures to above the 3 range, which is extremely vital. Oh, there's a land though.
There's a land. I wonder if it's a bit too late, but maybe no. We know that Fable does some work. Oh, Brutal Qatar. You know what I did recently? I have to share this with the stream.
Okay.
It's really bad though. I did this Elish Norn deck, and it is mono white, right? Standard. And Brutal Qatar triggers twice, which is really mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very mean.
Oh, I like it. Oh, okay. Now we have access to the Brotherhood's End, and seems pretty good.
Well, it's a little bit late. If that came down turn 3 instead of that Fable, that could have been really good. But Gabi's at 4. Yeah, that vet and the tokens that are 2/2s. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yikes.
It was the right card at the wrong time, let's say, or
Yeah. Yeah.
and we are going to have a game three. Both games were super fast, right?
Hmm.
It's like it goes either way. Like, who do you think it's favored now after sideboard with the is it on the play?
I would say Gabi, just because being on the play in this matchup is extremely vital. The reason why is Thalia. On the draw, Thalia really limits your spells because you can only play one drop or a 1 mana spell when Thalia is out and you have 2 mana. Then when you have to get Brotherhood's End, like they're already on turn 4. It's just a big deal.
And I was also going to say that Gabi will get into a much better position if Faye draws a third land this time at an appropriate time, and that happened here. So things are looking much better than the previous game. And sadly, on the opposite side, Sonic did not draw a third land.
Oh, that voltage surge is so good
Hmm.
for Faye here.
Yeah, because the voltage surge, you know, it turns the 2/2s into 1/1, so it basically has the clock. And now with the fading hope, you quartered the clock that turn. So like, there's just a lot of good stuff happening right now.
And we have Jean. I love this card. But we have Valorous Stance on the other side, just completely destroying. And both players, like we see that Sonic is struggling to get the third land. Gabi does have access to some more cards, but still missing the creature. And that's where these decks sometimes get tricky because you do have the answers, but you don't have the threats, right? So
Hmm.
you cannot really punish your opponent when they miss land drop or have a slower start because you also don't have the ability to pressure. And we see that happening here with Faye.
Exactly. One of the problems is in these mid-range decks is it's sometimes difficult, as you said, to punish your opponent's slow start. And against an aggressive deck, now Sonic is kind of like a third land wasn't missed because there was no pressure for the past couple turns. So it's kind of like everything's all even now, and now we're just at a regular game.
Ooh, Brotherhood End.
Hmm.
That's such a great card. But is it enough? Because now we have Sonic playing the veteran,
Hmm.
starting to pumping stuff, choosing to pump itself.
Hmm.
Interesting choice. We know that Faye has Strangle.
Hmm. Yeah, the strangle is good here, but the problem for Gabi, which would make me very sad, is the two shore ups without any creatures to protect. And this is again, as you mentioned before, the problem with you're drawing the wrong cards in the wrong order, and you would really have loved to have the shore up with those lands when you cast your Haughty Djinn to protect it from your opponent's removal spell.
Yeah, but this deck, Gabi deck does have more creatures than the regular mono
Hmm.
blue one, right? With the fables, but still, this white deck being able to have all the this Azorius deck able to have all the answers, and now it's looking really bad for Faye.
Yeah, and now let's see what the Fable's gonna take away. The shore ups, and this is one of the good things about Fable of the Mirror Breaker too, right? Is it allows you to discard these cards that aren't good in this exact position and hope to find better ones. And sadly, for Gabi, it didn't work out this way.
Yeah, it's not looking too great, and I think Gabi played really well, just didn't really get a chance. Both games that we saw, we got some mana struggles, and now we had these instance where there was just not enough, right? Not enough pressure. Jean is such a key card. If the opponent
Hmm.
has a way to do it Jean, we are doomed.
Hmm.
uh Thank you for both our players to showcase their competitive skills here. Thank you, Gabi, and thank you, Sonic, so much. We are very happy to have your games here showcased today. And Steve, what did you thought of this match?
It was, it's a very interesting match, and I wish, things went a little better mana wise for both players. But it was very, very. We got to see the power of brotherhood, and there even in games where you are behind, being able to just completely wipe your opponent's board is a very powerful thing. And sadly, sometimes that isn't powerful enough to win, but Faye can only do with what the cards you're given, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's not much of an option there. Once again, thank you so much for both our players showcasing competitive skill here. And our guest, Steve, if you are not following Steve yet, TheNerdySteve on Twitter. And you also have a Twitch, right?
Yes, I also stream most days on Twitch, and right now I am been doing the metagame challenge where I've been, as I mentioned before, using an updated version of the white blue soldiers list because it's a very, very powerful deck and it's very, very strong. And I love attacking with creatures and drawing a bunch of cards. Like there's really almost nothing better in Magic for me.
Oh, I think I'm going to watch because I'm trying to switch to something more aggressive.
Hmm.
So I think I'm going to tune in your stream and see. But we have more magic today. We are halfway there. We saw two matches. We have two more to go. And can we have player slider for our next match, which is going to be against Aoife that is playing mono white Midrange, and this is one of the most played decks of the week alongside with Grixis Midrange. I see that this list has been everywhere. What do you think of this mono white?
I really like the mono white deck here. One of the cool things about it is it can be very specialized and tailored to a lot of different metagames and how you like to play. You could have different amounts of the one that draws you a card and then the peasant that gets you a plains, or you can go a little higher. And so there's a lot of like cogs you can change to suit your play style, and it's a very, very cool control oriented deck that I just love.
Yeah, Wandering Emperor just such a card.
Yes. Yeah.
Like no, don't worry. I have so many times died to their card that I cannot stress enough how good it is. But let's see what deck Aoife is playing against. So can we have our other player? There we have Soph is playing Esper Midrange. And you thought about this deck. Okay, so you told in the beginning that one of the deck that you wanted to see was Esper Legends. This
Hmm.
is not quite Esper Legends. It's a bit of a different build, more like Esper Midrange with some legends. We know there's a
Yeah.
version that is much more legends than this one. And what do you think of this build here, for example, with cards like Underdog that are not every time played in this deck?
Hmm. Yeah, this is a very interesting take on the deck with the underdog and specifically the evolved sleeper. This is a deck that can put a lot of pressure early on with evolved sleeper, and then maybe Adenic and underdog and Rafine to get a lot of damage early on. But with the evolved sleeper and Rafine, specifically combined with something like Shieldred, which is in here, you can play the long game. And if your early aggression doesn't, you know, kill your opponent, a top tech evolved sleeper can draw you a bunch of cards fairly quickly to get you back in this game. So it's like it's a really, really cool take on this deck, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think we can have our match here start. But one thing that I noticed is like you think Esper would be much more controlled than White and White aggressive, but in this case, I think there's kind of like both are mid-rangey, right? Because this
Yes.
one on White is much more uh later game than the
Hmm.
usual typical mono white, and this Esper is more aggressive, as you said, than our typical Esper lists. So it's going to be interesting to see who takes here the aggressor role and who takes the controller role.
Exactly. And one of the things that A key card here might be a Shieldred. I mean, Shieldred's always a key card in whatever matchup because it's so powerful. But the white deck, if Shieldred doesn't attack, the white deck can sometimes have a hard problem removing it because it's not tapped for the Wandering Emperor. I think Lay on Arms is one of the only cards that can very reliably remove it. And if your opponent has a Shieldred out, it means your Reckoner Bankbusters can't loot without drawing you cards. Your Sanctuary Wardens can't create 1/1s without damaging you. So it can put a lot of really weird pressure on the mono white deck that is very, very hard to interact with.
And one of the cards that I really like in mono white is this one. It doesn't seem like the farmhand doesn't seem like something that is crazy good or overpowered, but it gives so much consistency to the deck and allows you to keep ends that usually you could not if you didn't have that third land or fourth land.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There is one of the cool things with the. Oh, also, I just want to make a point with Anointed Peacekeeper is gonna make. Oh, so Soph kept a hand with 3 wedding announcements, or maybe drew one, and that's just gonna be a very and there's gonna be like 8 wedding announcements on this board, and creatures can get very, very big, very, very quickly, or very slowly, depending on how you look at it.
No, like let me tell you, this wedding announcement is one of those cards that it looks like the more you have, the more insane it gets. It's spiraling. Like your creatures having +3/+3, it's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm,
And here we have a wedding announcement battle
mm-hmm,
with Aoife also playing their wedding announcement.
mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things is our Soph cast a Shieldred, and then Aoife ended up lay down arms to kill the Shieldred and exile it. And that's one of the only ways that Aoife could have removed it. And so it's very, very appropriately timed because Shieldred can get out of hand very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, we know that Shieldred just carries some games solo,
Mm-hmm,
especially if. But there it is. The card that you lay out the arms is just such a great removal that white really needed. You
mm-hmm,
don't really care that your opponent gains 3 life. You're removing a big threat for 1 mana.
mm-hmm.
It's such a good card,
Oh, yeah.
and it's easy for you to get enough planes when you're playing a mono white deck, and especially when you have Farmander also providing you with some extra planes. And anointing peacekeeper saying wedding announcement. How much do those wedding announcements cost now?
I think they cost 7 mana now, so I don't think anyone's going to be able to afford that wedding anytime soon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know how prices of weddings are in America, but it's kind of like here the same. Nobody can afford weddings.
Right? And so this is, I think, a really important couple of turns here that right now Aoife kind of knows what is going on the opposing side of the board, and you have to decide as a player, do I try and be a little more aggressive, or do I try and go for the long game? Because you have to decide, do I want my opponent's wedding announcements to eventually be able to be cast and come into play, or do I try and kill my opponent before then? And there's a lot of different ways to navigate this, depending on how you think your deck should win.
Yeah, and still, Seraph kind of allows you to do both at a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
This card is really powerful, and the versatility, right, to choose between these different flying, lifelink, etc. Like it wins so many games, because if you are on behind, you can just give lifelink, start gaining some life, and the flying sometimes just ends games. We see here that Soph does not have anything with flying.
Mm-hmm.
That's a card I would like to draw if I was on my offside.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things here too is your opponent or Soph has a big board, right? But can't really until another wedding announcement flips, can't really get through you right now. So you have time and you have to figure out how you want to use the next couple of turns.
And Anointed Peacekeeper entering again, probably saying wedding announcement again.
Their
Oh.
activated, if their activated ability is that Aoife, sorry, I'm pronouncing that probably wrong, is worried about, then that may actually be a better choice than wedding announcement, because Soph has all the lands you need to cast that wedding announcement. Paying 2 more is not a big deal. But if a planeswalker were to land, that's 2 mana every time it needs to be activated, in addition to paying 2 mana to cast it in the first place. Wandering Emperor. That's or you can even pick Evolved Sleeper.
Yeah.
And drawing a card costs 5.
Well, and one of the interesting things with naming the Wandering Emperor, though, here, from what I think about Anointed Peacekeeper, and I could be wrong here, while it makes your opponent's abilities or costs to cast a spell 2 more, it makes both players, when they activate it, cost 2 more as well. So I think for Anointed Peacekeeper, if it's on the Wandering Emperor, your Wandering Emperor to activate it will cost 2 more to use.
That's true. You're right. The ability tax is symmetrical. The spell tax is not.
Which is a very interesting, weird thing that is mostly irrelevant, but sometimes, like here, it can come into play potentially. It has caught me off guard numerous times, so I still don't know that it that it does that.
And Soph here at 8 life with Aoife having ways to having that much damage in flyers, which is really scary. So looking for a desperate answer here with the Evolved Sleeper. Also, I'm probably mispronouncing the name. Not only do I mispronounce names of people, I also mispronounce names of cards. And I often blame it on English not being my native language. But then people are like, this is not an English word, because a lot of the cards are actually like not English. And I'm just like using that excuse, and it's not even related. So here we have the attack for 8, Xaxis in the air.
Looks like Aoife has taken the first game here. Let's see what sideboarding looks like.
Right away, is there any card, Steve, that caught your attention in the sideboard?
This is.
What are you thinking?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what am I really worried about. There is the temporary lockdown as something I might consider, but temporary lockdown also gets rid of a lot of your stuff. And if you want to maybe go for a more controlling, maybe you want to add farewells or stuff, or if you were just like, hey, I kind of was the aggressive deck there. I was the one who put pressure on my opponent, my creatures. Maybe I want to, take out my Reckoner Bankbusters and be a little more aggro, because that seemed to work out well.
What do you think, Kuro, about this sideboard?
I don't know if I like the idea of taking out all of those cantrips, because one issue that Esper is able to deal with very well is one issue that's very well is basically play big value stuff that also gets card advantage. And losing Bankbuster can be potentially losing a really good blocker for something that has tokens or counters from like Wanderer, from Raffine, other types of stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of times Bankbusters is seen more like a draw card, but it is a blocker, and it's extremely good against cards like Liliana. When they make you sacrifice something, you can crew the Bankbuster, sacrifice it, etc. Like, it's definitely a very good card and versatile. And I really like this hand here for Aoife. Aoife.
I looked it up.
Oh, I'm really sorry. My pronunciation of names is terrible. If you ever been on the VML here live and I've mispronounced your name, I'm deeply sorry. It is definitely not on purpose, and yeah.
So this laydown arms is going to be super clutch here because there's that third planes, and Aoife could play a peacekeeper here, which they do. Next turn, LDA laydown arms might come down. We'll have to see. In that hand though, double Wandering Emperor. Jeez. It's really good that the Peacekeeper is down because it basically means that those aren't coming down. And then on top of that, no removal in Soph's hand means that there's no way that Peacekeeper is going to go away anytime soon. Disdainful Stroke does not target laydown arms. Make Disappear can't counter it very easily because it's so cheap. There's a Candle Trap. I really like Aoife's position here. Soph is really, this is not a good position, I think.
Yeah, it also going to depend, right, on what Aoife is playing around, or, you know, because Aoife didn't cast Lay Down Arms last time, and so maybe it's also going, maybe I can wait another turn to get the Rafine, but decided to go for it here. But there's a lot of, you know, interesting ways to potentially navigate this. And also, now Soph can decide how deep do I want to protect this Rafine with my Make Disappear.
Yeah, it's possible that what they decide to do is just use the Make Disappear right now on the LDA, sacking Dennick, and then Candle Trap goes on the Rafine, Dennick gets reanimated, and then they go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Because Candle Trap is much better on Rafine for Soph than LDA.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it can't attack or deal damage, you still get the amazing looting trigger.
Exactly.
God, Rafine is insane.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Let's see how this plays out.
That card really carries a lot of games, and it is especially good if you have multiple creatures.
I don't think Aoife meant to pay for the 2 there because, yeah, that was. We'll put that on the list of things that you would never do on real life that Arena sometimes makes you do accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so rough. But it might actually pay off because now I splash for that thing.
And here the ward gets really good, making you have to pay that extra one. It doesn't seem like relevant at times, but that extra one adds up. We know here there's a Wanderer, but oh, a Gunjo getting rid of the Peacekeeper.
And if Soph draws a land, is that Disdainful Stroke back up with Wandering Emperor? It is! And now Soph is back in the driver's seat all of a sudden. This is incredible.
Oh, but we have another great card here for Eve there.
Oh my god! The card quality of these draws are just incredible, I think, right now. Both players have clear things that they could potentially do.
Yeah.
I think Soph is slightly ahead, but Soph has one Disdainful Stroke. If Aoife slams the Emperor into this Disdainful Stroke, next turn, Owl is coming down. Or even Farewell. Yep.
And there it is. But now Soph doesn't have any access to any more cards. There's that Dennick that can be played from the graveyard, but that AO is going to be very relevant, and there is a Farewell on the other side as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Soph can't really play around Farewell right now. Soph has to basically think, I hope that I have a counter magic right now.
Is this Farewell time?
I think so. Soph doesn't have counterspell. I'm calling it now. And the reason why is Arena stops. So I think it's a land.
And,
or a Dennick. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and everything happens there. Everything is exiled, but that Wanderer is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
But She's at 1, which means no tokens yet. Shieldred. Oh, that's so good.
Very, very good.
All right. So this all is coming down. Yep. Even if it dies, that's totally fine. It has vigilance, so it can't even die to Wandering Emperor. I've certainly been on the receiving end of all, and it's so frustrating not being able to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
Such a big deal. You have to use Farewell or be lucky with some other exile card like March or something.
Oh, when we have removal here, which is really good.
Yeah, I agree. This may target the Shieldred. Let's see
yeah.
if the yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, you die in 4 turns.
It's always unfortunate though when like you have to. This happens a lot more in like limited than constructed, but when you have to use a pacifism type of effect, and then you have to like actually remove the creature, to waste 2 removal spells. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But it looked like we are prioritizing the borrowed time for another target later on, and maybe going, you know what, I can beat the Shieldred triggers, and I don't need to remove it this turn at least.
Yeah, Soph maybe even Aoife might even be thinking like maybe Soph is going to play a second Shieldred and try to get around the Candle Trap and have it be an attacker. But and then you can punish that play by borrowed timing the Shieldred.
Exactly.
Of course, it's equally possible that Soph is saying, I'm okay with this Shieldred staying in the battlefield. I'm going to wait for you to spend another rule spell, then I'll play the second one that may be in my hand.
Exactly.
It could go either way here, I think.
And it's also interesting because now we are attacking with 2 creatures, and we're throwing away our 1/1 token because we prioritize the wedding announcement draw trigger over another 1/1 creature.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the only thing is that Eve is at 5 life.
Yes.
So the Recliner will be able to draw you something, and that's a good card.
Soph just passed. So the hand must be counterspells and Wandering Emperor.
I'm also
or something like that.
Thinking like maybe if there's a Void Rend or something for maybe a borrowed time, but maybe you probably would have done that earlier, or maybe you're just waiting until the last opportunity. But it was neither, it seemed.
Ask and you shall not receive.
Exactly.
So Soph has exactly enough mana to pump up Evolve Sleeper to be a 4/4 and draw a card, but this owl is going to kill in 2 turns. It's just like Honeygen. It's exactly the same.
Exactly.
It's just as powerful. Yeah. Literally the same.
And now the ability to gain life, it's really good.
Oh, wonderful.
And you know what else? That's an artifact. So that Banishing Slash is now capable of creating tokens. Any top decked estuary? The colorless land, Reliquary, Roadside Reliquary, now draws 2 cards. And Seraph is going to give lifelink here because Ao already has the other 2 abilities.
Oh, a negate there on the laydown.
And so you were right, there was more counter magic in the hand.
Nice read there on the arena.
It's it's what you pay me to do. I mean, yeah. And so now that the negate's cast, Sleeper cannot draw a card this turn, which is pretty relevant, I think.
So this is what I would like to call, an attack hoping that your opponent triple blocks. And that didn't happen. So you go out the admirable way with your own pain lands and loss of life.
But exactly what he said. What a way to go, right? At least I'm going on my own terms. That's what Soph decided to say. What a match that we had. I really enjoyed it. And Mono White just crushing it. And we are seeing why it's one of the most played decks of the week. What did you think of this match here?
I really, really enjoy it. One of the interesting things about the mono white deck in this version is it can, while it's like kind of a mid-range deck, it can very surprisingly be a very aggressive deck. And so it's very, very hard to play against it and sideboard against it because there's so much versatility. It does so much things, and it's very, very hard to prepare. Like in that first game, those wedding announcements got out of hand with so it's just very, very hard to play effectively against a deck that can do so much so well.
Exactly. And Kuro, what did you think of this? Were you expecting Mono White to just crush the Esper like this?
Well, mono white is very interesting. Having access to such a powerful spell as laydown arms is really no joke. I mean, Source to Plowshares is regarded as one of the best removal spells in the history of the game for a very specific reason. That life that you gain means absolutely nothing in terms of winning or losing. It's a downside that is not really a downside. The bigger downside is having planes. But what the mono white deck lacks in counterspells makes up for in consistency. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Reckoner Bankbuster draws cards. Wandering Emperor makes multiple tokens. Wedding Announcement draws cards. And then Rule Set Reliquary draws cards. You can afford to play a colorless land that sacks to draw to because you're monocolor. And everything works really well together, which can result in defeating an otherwise powerful deck such as Esper. And it really comes together very well. I'm scared of it when I'm playing against it and I'm control. I'm not worried about counterspells, but it's entirely possible they have good stuff anyway.
I've been playing against this deck lately more than I would like to admit, and it is really strong. That Steel, Seraph Steel, it's so good. Definitely underrated card, and it makes sense why it's in this deck because I've lost a lot of games to it. But we have one more game of Magic to go, as we are already almost 2 hours in our stream. These games have been very interactive. This one a bit faster, but the first two, they we saw here a go back and forth, and decks kind of showcase what they're meant to do. And let's see our player side here. What's going to be our last game of the night? So we have Emma, and Emma is running Grixis Midrange, which alongside with Mono White is one of the most played decks of the night. So we saw the meta breakdown in the beginning of the stream, and Mono White and Grixis both at the same number. I think it was 26 or 29 decks. Copies of the deck. And here, Grixis Midrange, it's the deck that won actually the last VML. So what do you think, Steve, here of this version of the Grixis?
I love this version of Grixis. There's no real surprises here for me. It's a very established stock Grixis deck where it just has a lot of card advantage and a lot of 2-for-1s, and it's just gonna maneuver and invoke 3-for-1 sometimes, but it's just gonna maneuver a lot of what your opponents are doing at a very effective and efficient rate. One of the things I just love about this deck, as we mentioned it before, but Fable of the Mirrorbreaker is such a powerful card, and in these mid-range decks, you can discard your removal again if you're going against a control deck, or you can discard your more slower cards against aggro decks, and you can find what you need, and that's what makes this deck really, really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And Em actually has been playing a lot in the VML. Definitely a great player and a player to look at. So I'm excited to see how she commands this deck that is going to play against Azorius Soldier, which is a deck that we already saw. And Zabracus is actually running this deck. Probably you know Zab. Zab is a streamer. She makes awesome content over on Twitch, Instagram, TikTok. I think I see her everywhere, and for a good reason. Zab also been playing a lot of the VML, and I really love to see it. Last time I did coverage that Zab was playing, she was playing Mono Red, and now Azorius Soldiers. So definitely I can see here a bit of an aggressive tendency and more aggro decks. I like the answer here. Or what are you thinking about the most when preparing for this matchup? Making sure I pace myself with creature and removals properly. So, Kuro, what's your opinion on this deck that we already saw, but we can see here again?
Well, the thing about soldiers, and we saw soldiers a little bit earlier tonight, is that there's various ways to decide to put your main board and your sideboard. Basically, some people think it's important to protect the negotiators in the main and the other individual anti-removal spells, like Slip Out the Back, in the sideboard. Zabracus has decided to put those in the main board and put the Protect the Negotiators in the sideboard. And I think the distinction is very clear. Protect the Negotiators is much better against decks that seek to play big spells that are highly valuable. Board wipes like Farewell, planeswalkers like Wandering Emperor, or other big threats like Shieldred. Slip Out the Back, however, is more concerned with dealing with one-on-one removal, such as Cut Down, Abrades, or Go for the Throat. And in this matchup against Grixis, where they primarily play one-on-one removals versus board wipes, I think Slip Out the Back will be extremely good here. It's also better with Thalia, which there's a 4 of here, because Slip Out the Back only costs 2 mana with Thalia out, whereas Protect the Negotiators costs 3 without Kicker, 4 with Kicker. That's so expensive. And you have to really think about that. There's even that Spell Pierce in the side too, probably for those Fables. I'm really excited to see how this is going to turn out.
Yeah, let's watch the games, and definitely an exciting matchup that we are going to see here. We see that Saraham is on the play, Emma here. What a great end. If I was playing against soldiers and I had Emma's end, I would be pretty happy about it. Cut down into Harvester, into Fable, into Invoke Despair. I think this is the dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, this deck has blue in it?
Right?
But,
And
I mean, looking... Go ahead.
One of the great things about this hand specifically, though, even though we are missing blue mana, because Zab played a 1-drop creature, we got to use all of our mana on turn 1. We're going to use that all on turn 2, and most likely we'll Fable on turn 3. And that also sets us up for an Invoke Despair on turn 4, potentially, depending on what we draw. And that is one of the most powerful things this deck can do, and it's going to be very, very hard for Zabracus to come back from that.
Yeah, for sure. Emma only has 3 main deck counterspells, as I understand it. It's 2 main decks and 2 Make Disappears and 1 Spell Pierce. And so I think this is hedging quite a lot against aggro decks. So it's a very good situation for Emma in this particular match, for sure.
And that Fable entered the battlefield.
And
Fable of the Manisi.
And Emma also attacked with the Bloodthirst Harvester into Zab's 2-1, and that's always a very... I don't know what I would do in that situation if I want to try and get in for the 3 damage or save it for a removal later down. And there's just a lot of interesting things about that. But I think Emma was like, I'm going to be aggressive. If my opponent takes 3 damage, that's good. If my opponent blocked the creature and we trade, that's also good. Right? And so that means I want to just kill Zabracus before they get a board of soldiers and overwhelm me.
And here we have an interesting decision with the Fable deciding not to discard. I think that's a good idea. Like you like your land, right? You need a land here, and you do have good spells. That Fable attacking now allowing to have enough mana for Invoke Despair.
Mm-hmm.
And this Invoke Despair is going to be really good, making Zab sack the only creature that she has available, and Emma draws 2 cards.
I was joking earlier, but it really looks like Emma doesn't have any blue cards.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Exactly.
Not that it matters.
Mm-hmm. But
Emma's doing just fine.
Yeah, and Emma's also going to be in a really, really good spot now, because as the Grixis deck or any deck with Fable and specifically Blood Tithe Harvester, if you have those both on the battlefield, you literally couldn't be happier. And, in a couple turns, you're going to be able to copy that into, Zabracus' board, and you're going to start being able to take over the game very, very quickly unless a Brutal Cathar is found.
Yeah, and Brutal Cathar might not even be the end of the world anyway, because if it exiles the Fable of the Maniki Biki, then you can play some Remove Iki and get your Kiki Jiki back.
Exactly.
So you got that going for you. And now a Blood Tiki, the Harvesti, is getting down. It's going to make some Blood Tikis.
And Harvester just works so well. Sorry, it works so well with the Kiki Jiki, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and maybe Brutal Cathar might not even be in the main deck for Zabracus. And
Oh, is that right?
potentially.
Ooh.
So this is going to be much more difficult to overcome. So before it was, you have to climb a little mountain, and now you have to climb Mount Everest. So let's see if Zab can get out of this.
This guy's officer is pretty interesting. It blocks really well, but that harvester is going to be getting that value down.
Mm-hmm.
No, a Brady is really good as well.
Ooh. Yeah, you have to kill the vet first, because if the vet doesn't die, you're letting them. You're letting your opponent. Oh, there's no. Woohoo! It's here.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why it's played.
Exactly. But you were mentioning too, this was really good sequencing from Emma, trying to kill the siege veteran before you go to kill the 3/4, because this denies an extra 1/1 token.
There you go.
And with the veteran phased out, the officer dying doesn't get you a token anyway.
Yeah,
Great
and
place
getting
here.
Absolutely. Getting all those blood tokens means you're basically never going to draw poorly for the rest of the game, which is really, really important.
Oh, and this is exactly what you want to see, that corpse appraiser. It just works so well with the Kiki Jiki as well, and that's why this deck also plays blue. Able to exile a card from the grave from Zav, and now Emma has access to another corpse appraiser, so things looking pretty well here for Emma.
And it's also notable that I think Zab is really far away from having a Harbin win where you can attack with 5 soldiers, and that's kind of what Emma is ultimately trying to deny, because that is how you lose from this position if, like, there's a couple of surprise soldiers and then attack for 5, because 14 is a lot of life, but it's not a lot against when you can't block 5 creatures. But it looks like this is with Sheoldred drawn in hand, this is looking very, very, I don't know how you would say, but
very good.
I mean,
yeah, very good for Emma.
Yeah,
very good for Emma.
Very good for Emma, and for Zab, probably really annoying that Children is just such a great card. And Mono White doesn't have, it does have answers to it, but not at this point when not Mono White, sorry, Azorius control, as Azorius soldiers, not at this point.
Mm-hmm. And this is also kind of, we talked about early on, like, this was kind of a dream hand for Grixis, right? And it's because you had the removal, then the Fable, then more removal, right? And if you're just able to curve out without your opponent being able to, have a make a counter magic or the slip out the back, you just get so overwhelmed, and then you just have a bunch of 2/2s that aren't doing anything.
Valiant Veteran is a pretty nice top deck here, actually. If Emma didn't have the blood type Miniki Biki Jiki combo going on right now, I actually think that it wouldn't be that much. It would be much more of a stalemate. But the fact that Emma is basically able to kill 2 creatures for free every single turn, that's pretty incredible and pretty unbeatable. Those 1/1s are not looking very powerful by themselves.
Yeah, that's a good deal. It's a 2 for 0.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty good. It's a $500 bill right there.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you're just building up a blood collection to make sure you never draw anything irrelevant again. So it is more than ideal.
I just like that Emma leaves back the blood tithe just so that Zab can't double block and try to kill it, as if Emma is going to lose if that dies.
Yeah, exactly.
But
yeah. But sometimes you do have to play tight, and you are protecting the thing that is allowing you to just absolutely run away. And, sometimes, though, you do get a little cavalier and you just attack all, and then it comes back to bite you. So, good games.
And it's a good habit to develop, too.
Yeah, and one that I do not have, and I wish I did. because I attack all the time.
Zab there, just like such a sweetheart.
Mhm.
Good game. I mean, like, what can I do, right?
Exactly.
And just taking the damage there, 14 damage, extra damage, and
Mhm.
going to game two. And we see here the point of view of Emma's sideboard. We see a soul transfer, and soul transfer being a very popular sideboard card these days, especially because of some of those mono white creatures, the one with the shield, being able to be a more if AO, even being able to be a more effective removal when exiling. Any card that stands out to you, Kuro, here in the sideboard?
I think siding out Invoke Despair here. I know you asked me to find cards, but really key and notable is that Invoke Despair is getting removed, and I think that's a fantastic thing to do because it's just not that good here. It is granted it worked very well in game one, but that's the problem is that when you're allowing your opponent to play a bunch of creatures, or if you just didn't have the removal for it, that's so problematic. Brotherhood's End is obviously good. The spot removal is obviously good. Parasitic Grasp is very cool because
Mhm.
soldiers tend to be basically humans almost monochromatically, except for all the constructs. But you're not really interested in killing those Ocean constructs. You want to kill the Valiant Vet. You want to kill the Siege Vet. Basically, any card that has the word veteran in it, you want to kill.
Yeah, and the grasp kind of seemed like it came in for the invokes, and one of the reasons why that is like particularly good here is sometimes you don't get to that mana when opposing Thalia's out, and you need the removal early to get rid of those key soldiers, because otherwise the invoke, even if you draw 2 cards and kill a 1/1 soldier, that's not necessarily good enough at 5 mana, and you need to act earlier and quicker so you don't get overwhelmed.
And here is where playing three colors sometimes plays a part, because we do see Emma that has access to Brotherhood's End, which is debatable one of the best cards against Azorius soldiers, but not having the second red.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely gonna hurt here. And depending on how long it takes, Emma really wants to see a red mana here. But if she doesn't draw it, she does have a braid still, so it's not horrible.
Hmm.
And I think you really do have to braid the officer, A, because then now that's drawing cards. There's the red. But B, because if a siege vet comes out or even a valiant vet, that officer's not going to be killed. Well, I guess it gets killed if a valiant vet's out because that buff goes away. But a siege vet will get it outside of Brotherhood's End range. And you have to be conscious about that all
And,
the time.
and one of the problems too of these 3-color decks, we got the Xander's Lounge here, but a lot of the red mana in Emma's deck comes from pain lands, right? And pain lands against an aggressive deck aren't free, obviously, right? And so like if you take 4 or 5 extra damage over time, that can really come back and hurt you.
There's a little
Literally.
life back though. That's nice.
And here the attack from Emma. I really like the options that Emma now has available. Fable, Brothers, and a Braid. It's just like the sweet spot where you have some kind of threat with the Fable, as we saw was so good and won game one when the Kiki Jiki was able to replicate those harvesters, and also a bunch of removal that is super important early on against the soldier deck.
Emma's thinking about Otawara here, but not playing it. I certainly would not play it unless it was the last land in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
It comes in untapped. There's no reason to play it early. If it was a tap land, that might be different, but you never know if you need that bounce.
Mm-hmm. And this is also an interesting position because Emma's now going, what did Zab not cast? And why is there 3 mana up? What do I need to play around?
Interesting thing is that Protect the Negotiators cannot be cast with its kicker right now, which is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
And if Emma has noticed this, if Zab doesn't play, actually, wait a second. The Fortified, no, that tests for colors no matter what, right? It just enters untapped if there's a soldier. So the thing is that if Zabracus has Protect, as I've written it down with 2 C's, if Zab has Protect in the hand, first of all, she can only cast one at a time. Secondly, she can't add an extra token, so you only pay attacks be equal to the number of creatures that are out, and then you just have to take it from there. But for every turn you leave up Protect is a turn that you're not playing pressure. Reinforcements works well with that, but other than that, I have a feeling this officer's going to die.
Now, is it going to die in an Abrade or a Brotherhood's End along with everyone else?
I think a
I'm thinking
Brotherhood's
Abrade.
End is really tempting here, isn't it?
True. It would be. I agree, actually, Filipa. You're probably right.
If you
Yeah.
play
The thing
the
is, though,
Auto
is-
Aura, you could even... Okay, in this case, a Braid is chosen.
I'm thinking this. I was partial to this because the 1/1s aren't actually killing Emma right now. You only really want to play Brotherhood's End when you're like starting to be on the back foot, because it really gets you back to that sort of value or a situation normal, snafu, situation normal, all effed up.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And those fables are really carrying you the game with the harvesters. So if Zab doesn't have a way to remove them, like second one now.
Yeah. End is kind of showing a little weakness here, actually, because Emma's starting to make a board state, which makes Brotherhood's End kind of a bad card.
Yeah.
You don't want to play it. You want to play your other guys, and you want it to be spot removal. But you still need the end, because sometimes your opponent's going to just get that value, and they're going to get you. So Emma may discard the Brotherhood's End here, depending on whether she thinks she can push through.
Yeah, the tricky decision here, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say this is kind of where Emma didn't discard anything, right? And so this is where Emma has to kind of decide how she thinks the game is going to progress from here, because keeping the Brotherhood's End is going. I want to probably save it for my opponent to develop a little more board and get a really big advantage from it, And so there's just a lot of really cool, subtle things that these players are doing to try and navigate this game to, win. Because I assume that's what they're trying to do.
That's a good guess.
Yeah. I'd hope so.
I really like Lauren. This card has been really good against the Rakdos Grixis builds. Also good against Esper because it does take care of the wedding announcements.
And Dennick here, yeah, because it also stops any top decked corpse appraisers right now, unless you want to cut it down, but it forces removal from Emma.
Ooh, I would be really happy to see this mate disappear here if I was in Emma's shoes.
If this fable of the Maniki Biki lives, then Emma may just decide, I'm just going to play the Harvester your board every single turn game. And
yeah. Especially when you top deck a counter spell, right?
Yeah, so the stop. It could be because of Foundry, but it could be because of a Protect. Not sure which.
And this is also just a very interesting board, too, because now Zab has a win potentially with Harbinger if Emma doesn't have anything, or Harbin, not Harbinger, right? And we know that Emma does, but this could potentially be an attack for a lot of damage.
Yeah, it feels a lot like Zab is setting up for a Harbin right now.
That card is terrifying.
And we have a brutal effect.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I've died to it so many times.
At first, when they played against it, I don't know why in my head I read that it gets +1/+1 and flying itself. I didn't understand it was everything, and so you can imagine my
surprise.
How I was shocked. Yeah, my surprise when I saw a board exactly like Zabaz, and they play that creature. I'm like, okay, I don't care, and then I die, and I do care.
Exactly.
It's kind of amazing to me how a 2-mana creature does so much. It's amazing stats with a relevant ability that has upside. What?
I
But it's
mean,
legendary, so
Oh yeah. You know what? You're right. It's that justifies it.
uh-huh.
I'm not
Yeah.
surprised though. With this set, we had a 3 mana 4/4 toxic proliferate when it deals damage kind of sort of situation.
Yeah.
And I don't know, when I started playing Magic 10 years ago, if they would say 3 mana 4/4, it had to have a cumulative upkeep or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Cumulative upkeep. That is something that takes
Yeah.
me back to the times before I was born, the early '90s.
Yeah.
that that I mean, yeah, we had OGT, Old Growth Troll, just a couple years ago, and that felt extremely pushed. And if it's almost it's the game is so interesting to the point where that card you're describing costs 2 and a green, and people will stand there and say that makes it worse because it doesn't add devotion to green. And you're like,
Mhm.
wait, what? But it's more splashable. There's the Harbin that Filipa you were talking about.
I don't like this card.
I see. Because you
Oh.
lose to it, or
Oh, but the
because the
trigger
design?
happened, right?
Oh, Emma needed to do it before attackers were
Oh,
declared.
Oh no!
yeah. Oh
Oh,
no. I mean,
oh!
okay, there's the abrade there now, which does lower the damage, and but still, is this enough? No, but close.
Well,
That
what
that turns tables, right?
yeah. And what this means now for Emma is you're going to probably have to use the Brotherhood's End to, wipe the board, because I don't know if you can overcome this board with if your opponent draws a land and then uses the +1/+1 on everything. So you kind of have to make your decision of, all right, I'm board wiping here. Right. And sometimes you make a little mistake, or you press okay sooner than you want, and you have to just accept it and do what you can and move on, because it's still a very winnable game because there's a lot of blood.
Yeah, definitely still winnable. It happens. It definitely
Mhm.
it's what I said. I think it's the same kind of thing happened to me. As I didn't properly read the card, and I was like,
Mhm.
do I care? And then it's like, things are happening.
Interesting that Emma did not activate the Harvester to try or clone the Harvester to try to push in the extra damage. Zab is probably thinking, okay, this is going to be a board wipe. I can tell. It's
Yeah,
pretty
at
pretty
this
obvious.
point, yeah.
Mhm.
And that corporate praiser being able to exile one of the creatures that have in this case I think the Nick, right?
Yes,
Mhm.
correct.
So
Because
getting rid of an
the
extra
veteran,
card.
the veteran doesn't do anything by itself. You have to have a good board out, but the Denic could be one extra creature, and that makes Emma's at 5. That can
Yeah,
make or break the game.
I
Fable is an amazing hero.
I
Sorry.
like this player by Emma, just playing the Fable right away.
What is that?
Right.
Ooh.
And that gets rid of the token, which is great.
Yeah, there's no gobliki tikis going on right now.
Ooh, but there's a geeks. No.
I was like, don't discard it.
Yeah, I was like, no.
Yeah, but you need to discard it so you can draw Invoke Despair.
Right.
Wait a second. So this is a total one-sided board wipe.
I think there are a lot of different ways to go here. I don't know if you can. Does Gix command target, or is it just
No.
return up to? So it gets around the Denic.
It's extremely good like that. But I would be tempted to just put counters on my guy and push the damage personally. Oh well, just because. But then that would be taking down a 1, and that's kind of no different than attacking twice normally. The problem is that attacking with Corpse Appraiser and not gaining life means that Mishra's Foundry could get in, which, depending on what Zab has in her hand, could or could not matter. Okay, it's Siege Vet. This is game. I'm pretty confident.
still not over until it's over, but one removal spell does it.
There's a ton of blood tokens there, so one's probably going to get activated to discard the land or not. Yeah, so there's the trade.
And
Oh,
is
and
it
there's
gonna flip out the
the.
back? Yep.
Oh, okay.
Could matter. Could matter.
So now we get the blood, getting rid of the land. Oh,
Oh my god. That's so good.
I love that Corpse Appraiser being able again to exile the Nick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just a lot of card advantage going on here. And Emma's going, I don't know if I want to go down to 4 life because of the Pain Land, and now Siege Veteran, if it can find a way to gain flying or unblockable, it is lethal. I don't know if that exists, but
Such a great card right there.
mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe Zab is going to top deck Mighty Leap.
Right? Stranger things have happened, I'm sure.
That would be pretty fun.
Ooh, a card from
Oh.
N10.
Brutal Guitar.
Interesting. So based on this board, Zab doesn't quite know it yet, but I think that she's... Oh, well, no. The Cathar gets around cut down now. Oh, what a nail biter.
Ooh, and I love this attack because it's kind of, you're gonna defend, like you're gonna trade 1 for 1 anyway, so maybe your opponent just makes mistakes and not block, and it kind of results in the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, but now this is game.
Yeah, now it's game.
Good games here by both of our players, Zab and Emma. Just nicely played overall, and yeah, why is Grixis one of the most played decks in the format? It's consistent. It does honest work, kinda. Debatable.
Yeah.
Maybe. Work? Sure.
Exactly.
Grixis Command. Such a cool card. I love that card.
We had a very interesting matches here. I like that we showcased. I think the only repeated deck that we had was Azorius Soldiers, which out of 8 decks, we had 6 different ones, which is pretty impressive, in my opinion. Or 7. We had 7 different ones, which is really impressive. Steve, thank you so much for being our guest. It was such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Yeah, it was so great. You definitely added up so much to the stream, and I love your background. I'm glad people can see it. All those magic. I'm jealous. I want those magic cards. Where can we find you, Steve?
You can find me basically anywhere at TheNerdySteve. So, Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, all of that fun stuff.
Definitely will drop a follow, and excited to see your Azorius soldiers build and take on the deck. Thank you so much, Kuro, as well. It was great casting with you. It was I think our first time getting paired together, but it was really exciting. And
not our last, because we'll be doing it again at the end of the season.
Yeah, we will be repeating again, which is really nice. And thanks to Phoebe, amazing producer. You do too much for us. You're just an angel drop from the sky, and we really appreciate you. And we cannot end the stream without Phoebe is talking. I don't know if can they hear you? Can the chat hear? Okay, top. Okay. And yeah, thank you so much. Not an angel, not a Traxa. And we cannot go without thanking our players. You're amazing, and thank you for making the VML and commenting and playing. We really appreciate it. And of course, our sponsors, Good Luck i5 and Wizards of the Coast. I think that's a wrap for this week.
Wrap it up.
Thank you.
We'll see you next Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, and good games, everyone.
Yay!
Yay.